It seems unthinkable that the likes of Mr. Perfect, Jake Roberts, Ted DiBiase and so on never got the chance to reign with the WWE title. But there's only so much space at the top of the card and not everyone can have their go. But what about WWE stars that were not just considered for the belt but were fingertips away from actually grabbing it? The history books would have been totally different if original plans had been seen to fruition. I'm Cy for WhatCulture.com and these are 10 WWE wrestlers promised titles that never got them. Number 10. Wade Barrett, WWE Championship. In 2010, the Nexus debuted on main roster WWE TV and instantly became the leading story in the company due to their propensity for abject destruction. At the head of the table sat the charismatic Wade Barrett, who proved time and time again on the microphone that he was a born top heel. When the group was resoundingly beaten at Survivor Series by Team WWE, led by John Cena, who pushed backstage to come out on top, Barrett went on to 2 losses to then WWE Champion Randy Orton. If the Nexus had succeeded in their first major outing, would Barrett have been pushed to champion status? Regardless, it wasn't the only time that Barrett was put on track to major success. In 2011, it seemed that Wade was primed for a solid solo push. He had left the failing Core stable, dropped the Intercontinental title, and was part of the Money in the Bank ladder match. In an interview with WhatCulture in 2016, Barrett revealed that not only had he been picked to win the briefcase, but they'd even rehearsed it. This was apparently changed an hour before the show. Considering that at this time nobody had failed to cash in, this very well could have been Barrett's redemption, but ultimately became yet another chance slipping through his fingers. Number 9. Aleister Black, United States Championship. Whilst he had a palpable impact on NXT, Aleister Black's time on WWE's main roster never felt as though it got properly started before he was released. According to Black though, it wasn't as if the WWE writing room was ignoring him. They made plans, but most never amounted to much. Speaking on a livestream in 2020, Black revealed that there was a moment where he was supposed to win the US title, but then Vince's consensus was, I don't want to have him win his first title in front of no audience. It's hard to know if this move was made out of genuine concern for Black's career, or perhaps as an excuse to keep him away from establishing himself. After all, whilst Paul Heyman was famously in favour of Black's skills, his heavily tattooed and death metal persona don't scream the hallmarks of a Vince McMahon project. Furthermore, this reasoning falls apart when you realise many first-time main roster champions, such as Drew McIntyre and Rhea Ripley, were crowned in front of the screens of WWE's Thunderdome. In fact, Zelina Vega, Black's wife, said in an appearance with the Chasing Glory podcast that he was due to win the title from her on-screen client Andrade. For the man who did so, Apollo Crews, it was his first title win and it was with no crowd in attendance. So, what gives? Number 8. Muhammad Hassan, World Heavyweight Championship. Despite being on WWE television for less than a calendar year, Muhammad Hassan's controversial character saw him rise to notoriety. He was featured in segments alongside some of the biggest names in the business, such as Hogan, Stone Cold and The Undertaker, which isn't a privilege that every rookie gets. It was going to get even bigger, however. With SummerSlam looming that August, Vince wanted a heel for babyface World Heavyweight Champion Batista to drop the belt to, and at the time there was no one attracting more heat than Hassan. Considering the event was to be held in Washington, DC, not only the nation's capital but also Batista's home city, it seemed like the perfect hot plate for a huge crowd reaction. However, Hassan's Western critical character jumped the shark when, after losing a number 1 contendership match to The Undertaker, he seemed to pray for the arrival of masked ne'er-do-wells. Unfortunately, this segment infamously aired on the evening of a real terrorist attack in London, which drew mass controversy to the company. The long and short of which saw Hassan's character written off TV and led to his eventual release. Despite the fact it didn't happen, it's plain to see that Hassan as champion was the direction the company had been heading. Number 7. Lacey Evans, Raw Women's Championship. On paper, Lacey Evans should be a can't-miss babyface, a tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed All-American with a rough background that she overcame to become a mother and a soldier for her country. And yet these elements make crowds much more prone to boo her in that we get it, you're oh so great kind of way. To top it off, a smug and vindictive Evans is just more entertaining to watch than seeing her attempt to be the overcoming all odds babyface. Evans found a twisted kind of momentum in January 2021 when she began to flirt and eventually enter an on-screen relationship with Ric Flair. Angering his daughter and WrestleMania mainstay Charlotte, this was all part of setting up a program that would take them both to the show of shows. If the personal vendetta wasn't enough, WWE had the 2 battle for contendership to Asuka's Raw Women's Championship. Lacey came out on top and the match was booked for Elimination Chamber. But just as quickly as it came, it was pulled from the card when the following week Evans revealed that she was legitimately pregnant. Had this not been the case, Evans would have captured her first title in WWE and defended it against Charlotte at WrestleMania 37 as the top heel. Number 6. Ryback, WWE Championship. When you consider how fast the Feed Me More charts got over and the size of Ryback's big meaty neck muscles, then it's not surprising that Vince was high on him. Quickly shot into the main event in his first year, it always seemed possible that Mr. McMahon was going to pull the trigger on Ryback one day. Apparently, it was at least dangled in front of the big guy around his last couple of years within the company. Talking to the Angle podcast, Ryback detailed that he lost his Intercontinental Championship because he didn't sign a contract extension that the WWE put in front of him. To get his John Hancock on the dotted line, Vince and Ryback verbally made some agreements. These included a heel turn, switching out the singlet for trunks, and a WWE Championship run, which Ryback then explained got demoted down to the US title and putting over Kalisto. You should always take what the big guy says with a pinch of salt. Vince allegedly also promised that he'd let him squash AJ Styles at WrestleMania. But considering Vince's Arlo U1 reputation, this at least seems plausible. Number 5. Bronson Reed, NXT Championship. Despite feeling like its own little pocket universe which is often meticulously designed, especially during its better, blacker and golder years, NXT is still a wrestling promotion. That means all kind of different story ideas and considerations are taken into account, and just like main roster WWE, some of these possibilities apparently get passed on to the stars that concern them. Appearing on Sami Callihan's podcast, former NXT star Bronson Reed said that he was still intent on becoming a top guy in the world of pro wrestling, and that had been Triple H's intentions for him. In the words of the now Jonah Rock, "I was destined to become the top guy in the black and gold brand. That's what was supposed to happen. It was what I was promised. But as we all know, promises don't get kept a lot in professional wrestling." Reed doesn't mention a world championship run explicitly, but what else could he mean? There's no spot greater in NXT than holding onto the title, which, despite its standing as a developmental brand, has a seriously impressive lineage. Every man who has ever held it has made something of himself in WWE and or elsewhere, and it would have done wonders for Reed. Instead, he was unceremoniously released in August 2021 before his destiny could be fulfilled. Number 4. Mr. Kennedy, World Heavyweight Championship. When Mr. Kennedy arrived in WWE, it was immediately clear that the company was getting behind him for good reason. He had a strong look, he was solid in the ring, and he had unteachable charisma. As such, it wasn't really surprising that Mr. Kennedy got his hands on the Money in the Bank briefcase when he did. Considering that previous winners, Edge and Rob Van Dam, had both successfully traded the case for a championship, it was obvious that WWE had designs to do the same for Kennedy. With the Mr. McMahon's exploding limo story occurring that summer, and Kennedy vowing to cash in at WrestleMania, the company's vision for the following year was Shane McMahon as on-screen CEO and a newly crowned Mr. Kennedy as champion. However, Kennedy's time in WWE can be defined as pure distilled bad luck. Seriously, you could have bottled essence of Mr. Kennedy and sold it as a curse for your worst enemies. A suspected injury, which turned out to be a hematoma, forced Kennedy to defend and lose the briefcase to Edge, who would go on to successfully cash in. And with the very real Benoit tragedy putting a stop to Mr. McMahon's fake death, the plans fell to pieces. Continued suspension saw Kennedy slip down the card before his release, leaving him to find world title success in TNA instead. Number 3. Chyna, WWF Championship. Chyna, despite being WWF Women's Champion only once, remains one of the most important women in WWE history. She turned the tide on what women's characters could be and the involvement of female stars in men's spaces as she routinely got physical with her male colleagues. Most memorably, of course, she was the first woman to enter the Royal Rumble and King of the Ring tournament, and is still the only woman to hold the Intercontinental Championship. She was also the first woman to become #1 contender for the WWF Championship, but lost the opportunity and never made it to the match itself. However, that wasn't Chyna's only brush with the company's biggest prize. Chyna's former manager, Anthony Anzaldo, confirmed in 2020, claims that the star had made herself that Vince once offered her the belt in exchange for one favour. In Anzaldo's words, they offered her the WWE Championship belt, but Vince said, "You can't do Playboy." She chose Playboy over the belt. This decision made her a star in her own right for a short time, but may have burned bridges with the WWE for good. Chyna's foray into adult entertainment following her Playboy appearances are often suspected as one reason why she still hasn't had her own independent Hall of Fame induction. Number 2. William Regal, WWE Championship. In 2008, Regal shocked the world by winning the King of the Ring tournament, slumping into his throne at the end of the night with a malicious look on his face. Combining the coronation as king with his general manager role, Regal would describe himself as the most powerful entity in the WWE. Proving his hunger for control and respect, in a particularly memorable episode of Raw, Regal screamed at Kevin Dunn to take the show off the bloody air due to feeling slighted by WWE fans. It was shocking and fresh, and best of all, it's widely believed that Regal's previous in-ring dalliances with Randy Orton and Triple H were going to put him in contention for the WWE title, until Regal was kayfabe fired due to a wellness policy violation. Whilst never outright written in stone, all Regal needed to do was keep up the momentum of his character. He was hated by WWE fans in the best way, and putting the title around his waist for the first time ever would have been the right move. Regal himself has admitted that he was studying dictators, so we can only wonder how creatively wicked he could have gotten reigning the show as boss, king and champion. However, with a very real 60-day suspension for the Brits, the storyline vanished into thin air, and so did the chances of Regal ever being WWE champion. Number 1. Brutus the Barber Beefcake, WWF Intercontinental Championship. When it comes to WWF's most memorable characters from the 1980s, Brutus the Barber Beefcake is amongst them. With his garden shear prop, hair-obsessed gimmick and bright presentation, he's one of the superstars that casual or lapsed fans from the era are quickest to name. And yet, the only title he ever won was the WWF Tag Team Championship. That wasn't always the plan, however, but life got in the way of Brutus's ascension to mid-card gold. At the turn of the decade, Brother Brutai was engaged in a hot feud with Mr. Perfect and got the honour of being the first man in the company to pin Kurt Hennig during their WrestleMania 6 bout. From here, the plan was to take their story to the next level. They spent months on the house show circuit honing their perfect match, with the intended conclusion that Beefcake would beat Perfect at SummerSlam 1991 for the Intercontinental Championship. However, Beefcake's famous accident involving a parasailing friend put this ascension to champion to rest, as the star had to have life-altering surgery and took 2 years away from the business. According to Brutus, the company had toyed with the idea of giving him the strap multiple times over the 1980s, and this would have been a sure thing if not for this almost career-ending injury. The ability to reinvent must be something that every professional wrestler is thankful for. You might not get unlimited chances, but when you're in need of a refresh, a good gimmick change is always an option. Got an idea and need to see how it fares in front of a live audience? Take it for a test drive and see what happens. Some wrestling characters are so great that they're all a star needs, but that doesn't mean that they didn't go through some pretty awful ideas to get there. I'm Cy for WhatCulture, and these are 10 wrestlers with one great and one terrible gimmick. Number 10. Drew McIntyre. Whilst the WWE Universe popped big for Drew McIntyre finally ascending to the WWE Championship, there was one man who told us this would happen many years ago. For eons, much talk has centred around Vince's pet project, such as the decade-long obsession with Roman Reigns, but Drew got to play this role on TV in his best gimmick to date. At his true coming out party in 2009, Vince McMahon announced that he had personally signed McIntyre and that he was a sure thing future WWE champion. Drew's slow and meaningful Broken Dreams entrance felt regal, imposing, and said so much about the man's promise. Under this character, Drew would capture Intercontinental and Tag Team Gold. However, after a string of strange booking decisions, Drew was placed in a stable that would certainly be a low point of his career. 3MB with Heath Slater and Jinder Mahal really made no sense whatsoever, and was a perfect example of throwing names together to give them something to do. Whilst they had their moments, like the unforgettable WLC match that had no right to be as good as it was ultimately poor usage of a man that had so much more to give than air guitaring and jobbing. Number 9. Nikki ASH. Nikki Cross was the perfect complement to the lineup of Sanity, the tiny spitfire of energy and malice that was just as scary as her brutish male counterparts, but in totally different ways. Even when the rest of her team was called up to SmackDown, Nikki found solo success. Going up against NXT Women's Champion Shayna Baszler, she was the unpredictable element, which she proved by stealing the title and running away with it. The phrase "Nikki's got a secret" got over big time when Cross claimed to know something about Aleister Black's mystery attacker, who had injured the superstar in the Full Sail parking lot. More than anything, it was nice to see a woman interact in a storyline within WWE that wasn't about the women's title. Nikki's time on WWE's main roster has neutered her personality, and even the over-the-top, almost a superhero gimmick feels like a letdown. Whilst it landed with the younger audience at first, it quickly started circling the standard WWE drain that many characters find themselves in when they have nothing to do. Heck, the fact that she's been placed into the 24/7 championship picture says a lot. Number 8. Dustin Rhodes. Before the Attitude Era even kicked off, Dustin Rhodes was pushing the button of WWF audiences by portraying Goldust, a character that was laced with innuendo and eroticism. Whilst he never made it to the top of the mountain, much like his father, he was an essential part of the WWF roster. Goldust was a weird character in the best possible way, the type of insane creation that can only exist in the wonderful world of pro wrestling. Dustin jumped to WCW in 1999, where he was given a new coat of face paint and declared himself to be Seven. In vignettes, a white-faced Rhodes would levitate outside of a child's window and ask them to join what appeared to be a strange cult. Only 2 of these ever aired, and when Seven literally floated his way to the WCW ring that November for his debut, Dustin tore down and abandoned the gimmick then and there. Turner Broadcasting had basically killed it off before it got started properly because they were concerned about Seven looking like a child abductor. Unlike Goldust, Seven was awkward and weird for all the wrong reasons. Number 7. Mark Henry. In the 2010s, with his very real powerlifting records as the basis, Mark Henry began using the apt title of World's Strongest Man and inducting the crumpled bodies of his victims into the Hall of Pain. It was a more serious side than we had ever seen before from the man, even more deadly than his time in the Nation of Domination. Henry used this momentum to capture his first and only WWE World Heavyweight Championship at Night of Champions 2011. Most memorable of all was Henry's fake retirement segment where he suckered us all in and then dropped Cena like a stone. Wrestling fans everywhere are now suspicious of salmon-coloured suits. When it comes to the bad side of things, some people probably remember it fondly for how strange it was, but objectively thinking about it, the sexual chocolate gimmick was dumb. This can always be caveated with the 90s were a different time when it comes to poorly aged storylines, but Henry's sexual chocolate run was awash with them. The character was apparently a sex addict who lost his virginity at age 8 to his own sister. That shouldn't have been okayed for TV in any decade. Mae Young giving birth to a giant hand at age 76 is the kind of thing that's best not to try and understand. Number 6. Kazuchika Okada. Everything came together for Kazuchika Okada when he began to use the title of Rainmaker. Returning to New Japan after some time away, Okada manifested his own reality by adopting the character who brings in the big bucks wherever he goes. In the ensuing years, he captured the IWGP Heavyweight Championship multiple times, drove the company to new heights, and did so with a character with a level of pageantry thus far unseen in the promotion. But Okada's Rainmaker gimmick has a strange source of inspiration, and that is his short stint in TNA. After a string of matches on Explosion, TNA's secondary show, Okada's first real story in TNA began when he donned a mask and debuted as Okato, a wholesale rip-off of the Green Hornet film that had just been released in theatres and its character of Kato. Okato was aligned with Samoa Joe briefly, and the story would lead to the future Rainmaker finally making his Impact television debut. But following the end of the feud, Okada went back to using his real surname and making sporadic appearances on Explosion before leaving the company at the end of the year. The true loser in all of this is TNA, who wasted an amazing talent in every conceivable way. Whilst the Okato gimmick was awful, fans can thank it for helping Kazuchika realise that he needed to find his own character, lest someone force him into a role where he didn't belong. Number 5. Bull Buchanan. In the early 2000s, the Right to Censor stable was, for fans of the WWF, the most annoying and irritating gimmick in the company, which was precisely the point. Reflecting on their work shows that they were the perfect concept for a heel group following the Attitude Era's debauchery, a parody of those calling for the company to censor its antics. Bull Buchanan was the first to join Steven Richards' new unit, which was a combination of stars who had little else to do or had particularly controversial characters in the preceding years. Buchanan had struggled in the WWF to that point as a solo star and with short-lived alliances, and he was positioned as the muscle of Right to Censor, which he took to all too happily. Weird that his next gimmick, and his last before his WWE release, was totally the opposite. Supporting the barbs and diss tracks of John Cena, Buchanan was renamed to B-Squared, which apparently stands for the rather distressingly awful Bling Bling Buchanan, and played Enforcer for the breakout heel. What this essentially boiled down to was wearing a vest, nodding his head, and yelling booyah. The pairing lasted for 2 completely forgettable months. Is this entry on here just for me to shout about how good Right to Censor are? Yes, it is. Number 4. Chavo Guerrero. Chavo Guerrero is a perfect example of excellent highs and terrible lows. Chavo and his uncle Eddie had feuded in WCW, but by the time that the WWF purchased his contract, it was all water under the bridge, and taking a slightly more villainous turn, Chavo adopted the lie, cheat and steal outlook of Uncle Eddie. That being said, the 2 cheeky law-breaking rascals were so fun that they couldn't help but turn face organically. Of course, both guys were superb in the ring, but the vignettes that furthered their gimmick gimmick were just oozing with character. You can clearly tell watching the back how much fun Eddie and Chavo had working together. Chavo Guerrero's worst gimmick is that one that you've seen on the list of worst gimmick ideas ever plenty of times, but it can't be emphasized enough how utterly ludicrous it was. Dyeing his hair blonde and riding a golf cart to the ring, the newly enlightened Kerwin White wanted to sing the praises of the Anglo-American way and make snide remarks about anybody else. To take a solid worker like Chavo from an esteemed wrestling family and give him a racially charged character speaks so much about WWE at the time. After about 5 months, the Kerwin White character was understandably dropped after the death of Eddie Guerrero, but honestly that's 5 months we all could have done without. Number 3. Emma. Tenille Dashwood's time in WWE, despite her being with the company for nearly a decade, is unfortunately rather easy to forget. That being said, her first appearances in NXT as Emma got her over fast. A fun-loving klutz that danced a weird robotic jig, Emma was the kind of stupid that wrestling audiences get behind. It seemed like a parody of the WWE's previous diva culture, but more than anything, Emma was just reacting to the very strange entrance music that she was walking out to. In 2016, Emma was returning from a back injury and a series of vignettes began to play that hyped up a new character. It promised the makeover from Emma to Emmalina. Whilst Emma had ditched the ditzy character years prior, this was still a huge jump from her current gimmick. It was looking to be somewhat ironically inspired by divas of the past. Weeks of videos went by and internal reports suggested that the WWE had started advertising the character before they were sure that Emma could carry it. In February 2017, Emma made her Emmalina debut and promptly turned back around and left, transforming back into Emma. What a hilariously colossal waste of time. Number 2. Cody Rhodes. It was in ROH and New Japan that Cody Rhodes' real journey to the top of the pro wrestling mountain began, debuting with the moniker The American Nightmare as an ode to his father and his brother who had used it earlier in his career. Always dressed to impress, Cody's new persona was about reclaiming the Rhodes' rightful place in the wrestling world as one of the industry's royal families. Whilst some of his commitment was a bit extreme, looking at you, cringe neck tattoo, Cody's desire to effect change brought so many companies outside of the WWE much closer together. Cody's American Nightmare character is finally in the Fed, untampered with by Vince McMahon's hands because of how powerful it was. It's a far cry from his last appearance in the company back in 2016. Stardust was really nothing more than just a mini gold dust for Cody to play alongside his brother. The son of a plumber could have been forgiven for phoning such a half-assed idea in. Instead, as stupid as the character was, Cody made it work. Stardust was entertaining. For 2 years, Cody put his all into what was the most obvious reductive idea for a character and turned it into something worthwhile. Number 1. Kane. The Brothers of Destruction storyline may well be one of the best tales that wrestling has ever told. The coming of Undertaker's incinerated younger brother Kane, who he believed to be dead, was something that had us glued to our screens in 1997. For all of the incredible moments that Kane and The Undertaker have shared, however, the Big Red Machine has had a career worthy of that Hall of Fame ring in his own right. Glenn Jacobs calls himself lucky for the opportunity presented to him to play such a high-profile role. After all, he knew what it was like to have a bad gimmick or two, and was probably craving his big break. It could be the Christmas Creature, Mike Unabomb, or Fake Diesel. Any of these are bad enough to be Kane's most terrible gimmick. But of course, the real tip of the cap goes to Isaac Yankem DDS. During the 1990s, wrestling was transforming, and at times the WWF really struggled to figure out what audiences wanted to see. By the time of Yankem's debut, the idea of a gimmick based around a profession, such as IRS and the Repo Man, was very much old hat. An evil dentist just had no place in the evolving state of wrestling.
Do you remember how sometimes you watch your favorite TV show and all of a sudden the lead character is played by a different actor? It's weird, right? You're just meant to accept this could be the same dude, but it's not. Wrestling is actually very similar to this because if a gimmick has worked before, it stands to reason it could work again. So when you're out of ideas, just do a copy. Therefore, I am Simon from WhatCulture. Please do hit that subscribe button. This is indeed 10 wrestling characters played by multiple people. Number 10, the Nature Boy. Ric Flair is the guy we associate with this the most, but I tell ya, he wasn't the first. That's right. The original Nature Boy came in the form of Buddy Rogers, who was also the first man to hold the WWF Championship. He dubbed himself with such a name all the way back in 1950, where he would prance around like he owned the place and constantly waft his bleach blonde hair out of his face. So if you're looking for the template of the modern wrestling heel, you start with old Buddy. This is why 20 years later a young Ric Flair thought he could pull this off too, so copied it verbatim, be it the robes and even the finishing move. Flair just felt like enough time had passed that somebody could continue it on. Let's face it, he wasn't wrong. The third man was Buddy Landel, which admittedly is weird because now we've even got wrestlers with the same name doing it. This guy, he just looked at what Rick was doing and hit copy and paste, sometimes even when they were in the same promotion. It's a bit ridiculous. To be fair, Landel wasn't as successful as the other two, so this has slipped under the radar in modern times. But it does leave one big question. What even is a nature boy? Answers on a postcard. Makes no sense. Number 9, Sting. So Steve Borden smashed this, didn't he? For the best part of 5 decades, Sting was a staple of wrestling, and the amount of times he reinvented himself, the man is a hero and a legend. This is why when somebody else claimed they were the Stinger in 1996, people were a bit confused, as you would be. Imagine somebody knocked on your door and said they were you. I mean, even me saying that is gibberish. The whole point was, at this time, the NWO were trying to stitch everybody up as well as the icon, so much so, tag team partner Lex Luger started to question his loyalty. Whose side was he on? This led to the Full Brawl pay-per-view, and yep, to the shock of many, the face-painted man turned on the good guys when another Sting then joined in. The flub is going on. As it turned out, the first Sting was Jeff Farmer, a New World Order recruit who was hired to trick everyone. Now, it kind of worked because the real Sting was so outraged he left the fray, but that meant the fake Sting then tapped out Luger. As we all know, he would quite literally become fake Sting after this, and even did the gimmick in Japan. Seems even more unfair. I suppose you could say there was a third version as well, given sometimes Borden would wear a Sting mask over his Sting makeup, which, yes, if you're wondering, is the best spot in all of wrestling. Number 8, Mr. Wrestling. I always love this. If you're gonna get into wrestling, why not be Mr. Wrestling? Who could be better than that? We do start with Johnny Walker, who was basically retired come 1972 when he got an offer from promoter Paul Jones. He thought the Georgia market was more than ready for a Mr. Wrestling 2, and Walker agreed. It worked because it changed Johnny's life forever, and you're now asking yourself, well, what happened to the first version? Because that belonged to George Wooden, who you may know better as Tim Woods, and yeah, he was a huge success in this role, even making it to the WWF for a short period. Mr. Wrestling 2 was also brought in as the original's partner, although what their relationship was we'll never know, because nobody told us. It also meant that, yep, you had 2 dudes called Mr. Wrestling. What a wonderful, stupid sport. They both wore masks, which added to the gimmick, and Walker found so much momentum, former US President Jimmy Carter even wanted to meet him. He must have been a fan. Woods retired in 1983, but Johnny kept doing the character, and years later, Steve Corino would even become Mr. Wrestling 3. And of course, he teamed with number 2, and they won some tag titles down in Hawaii. This is madness. Number 7, the Conquistadors. Now, back in the 90s, this was just an enhancement talent tag team booked to wear weird costumes, masks, and then lose. That was it. So when the gold-covered duo returned in 2000, everyone was baffled. They had never been much of anything, and even more strange was the fact they now seemed to act like Edge and Christian. That's because it was them. This is when the ludicrousness started, because you would have videos with all of them in the same room, but of course this was a ruse. It was just a way to beat the Hardys for the tag team titles in the same year and protect themselves simultaneously. So that was smart. It then got proper Attitude Era, as 24 hours later there was a rematch, but this time it was Matt and Jeff being the Conquistadors, and yep, they won the belts back. If you're now thinking this is needlessly complicated for television, you'd be right, but that's not what this list is for. It's to underline wrestlers who doubled up on gimmicks, and this one just happened at pretty much the same time. Number 6, Sin Cara. So I like to be a positive Pete, but yeah, the first Sin Cara didn't really go to plan. Triple H's first big hire as head of talent relations, for one reason or another, we couldn't replicate what Mystico had been doing in Mexico because he kept falling over. Not great for a dude that was meant to be a super duper high flyer. This would have been fine mostly, I think, but when he started to fail wellness tests, well, they didn't look good. Eventually, WWE wanted to get rid of the man, but not the gimmick, so they just changed the person under the mask. Jorge Arriaga would step into the shoes, and man, did this get bonkers. Because eventually, he unmasked to become Hunico, and then both versions were feuding with the other, and yet none of it actually got over. Eventually, Hunico did become Sin Cara again, that he played for another 6 years, and I can safely say now, you will never see another one again, because even me trying to describe this was a mess. Number 5, Kane. Do you remember when we had 2 Kanes? What a time to be alive. Basically done because back in 1994 we had done Undertaker versus Undertaker. WWE decided in 2006 enough time had gone by so we could repeat the storyline and just use the dead man's brother. It also tied into the fact the original Big Red Machine, Glenn Jacobs, was haunted by the date May 19th, which also happened to be when his movie See No Evil was being released. So yes, this was marketing. It then led to the 1997 version of Kane appearing, which was played by none other than Luke Gallows, mostly because he was around the same height, and apparently this is all we needed. The pair then fought at the Vengeance pay-per-view, and the Imposter won, which led many fans to shout out loud, "What the hell are we doing?" Clearly everybody else then realized this story sucked, as the next night on Raw, the first Kane got rid of his doppelganger, and it could have been down to the awful wig Gallows had to wear, because as the rumor goes, Vince McMahon hated it. I am not surprised. Number 4, The Undertaker. And we did just talk about this. You should have seen it coming. But yes, we needed a weird main event for SummerSlam 1994, even though Bret and Owen Hart could have filled this slot. So after Yokozuna had killed the Phenom at the Royal Rumble, we greenlit it. It was so bizarre as Ted DiBiase was the guy to bring the dead man back, but it was quite clearly not the person we remembered. It just looked a little bit off, and WWE smashed you over the head with this because it was obvious what we were doing. And yes, it was actually played by Brian Lee, who you may know better as the leader of the Disciples of Apocalypse a few years later. He was also the Undertaker's friend. We even hired Leslie Nielsen to try and solve this case, which I did love because that guy was a hero. And then we got to the pay-per-view, and the proper Undertaker returned, and the pair had an average match. And trust me, that is me being very, very kind. Number 3, Diesel and Razor Ramon. This old chestnut. Never gets any easier, does it? Because after Kevin Nash and Scott Hall had decided to go to WCW, Vince McMahon was upset. He felt like he had invested time in the Diesel and Razor Ramon characters, so this was no good, when all of a sudden he had a plan. It didn't matter if he had the original performers under contract, because why not just take 2 random wrestlers and say that they were Big Daddy Cool and the bad guy? Well, I can tell you that, because it's stupid. Jim Ross had to introduce these two, and surprise, surprise, the audience was livid because they had been tricked. This created so much hoo-ha, the rumor goes, that Eric Bischoff even increased Hall's and Nash's wages, as he too thought they were going back to the World Wrestling Federation. I mean, this was nonsense. It was also an utter failure and ruined Rick Bogner's career, because he could never shake the stigma of being the fake Razor Ramon. Glenn Jacobs as Diesel was a little better, because only as discussed he became Kane. I tell ya, all of this was touch and go. Number 2, Suicide. TNA's Suicide was always a little strange because he was born out of a video game. For some reason, the company decided to have the story focus on this guy who had amnesia and had to get his memory back so he could become a world champion. I mean, that makes perfect sense to me. I suppose management thought it was a success, so he became a real fighter, and then man, everybody took on this role. Frankie Kazarian was the first guy to do it, but he had duties as his real self too, so Christopher Daniels would also help out. TNA just refused to get rid of this persona, however, so soon Jonathan Gresham, TJ Perkins, Ishimori, and Nash Carter can also lay the claim. Daniels even won the X Division title as this dude, as did Austin Aries. I don't want to get into that. It all turned out to be ludicrous and was just impossible to follow. I suppose the promotion needs some credit for having such faith in the gimmick, and we even saw him as recently as 2021, so ironically he's not dead yet. And maybe you could be the next Suicide too. All your dreams come true. Number 1, Doink. And maybe, just maybe, Suicide's run was inspired by Doink. Because my word, everybody has been flipping Doink. The first one debuted in 1992 with Matt Bourne under the makeup, and this was the best version. Matthew wanted to play it like some sort of demon clown, and it was genuinely unsettling. Sadly, he ran into personal problems and WWE let him go, but clearly they were set on the gimmick, so the ran began. Steve Kern, who was also Skinner, tried it for a bit, as did Ray Liccamelli, who was Doink many times, including the WrestleMania 17 gimmick Battle Royal. The Brooklyn Brawler Steve Lombardi did it in 2012 too, and while the character appeared at the 2020 Money in the Bank match, nobody knows who this was, so it's unknown. We haven't even touched the surface because so many other people have also done it, including a one-time appearance by Chris Jericho. It will work though, as we still talk about him today, and there's a contingent of fans who would take him back tomorrow. I do believe I'm one of them. Don't at me. We all know that AJ Styles and Samoa Joe left TNA and totally smashed it. There are other stars that have done this as well, but the real litmus test was making it to WWE and see how they got treated. It was a total roller coaster. Which is why today many have forgotten about some truly awesome jumps. I am Simon from WhatCulture, and this is the 10 most successful TNA to WWE Transitions. Number 10, Abyss. That's right. Despite never appearing as his masked character in WWE, Chris Park has been super successful in the promotion. You just never see him. This is because he was hired as a producer in 2019, and by all accounts is doing a great job. That must be true too, as sometimes people can come and go in that role. It's a bit like an open door policy, but Park is now a mainstay. It's quite lovely to see. You may recall there was a tease of some on-camera action when he was briefly AJ Styles' statistician back in 2020. That didn't go anywhere, mostly as it was during the pandemic, where nothing made sense. I still hope one day he can have the match he deserves, even if it comes and goes as a memory. That dude gave everything to TNA, and it sounds like it's a similar situation now. He has smashed it. Number 9, LA Knight. Another one that goes under the radar. Eli Drake, as he was known in TNA, won the world title, the tag titles, and he was the king of the mountain. He was also well known for his character work outside this bubble, and most people assumed he would go on to bigger and better. Even though he hasn't won a championship in WWE, apart from a brief run with the $1 million belt down in NXT, he had such a good run there, and main roster call-up was always on the cards. And sure, it started oddly when he was recast as Max Dupree, the leader of the wonderful Maximum Male Models, but ever since Triple H switched him back to the more familiar LA Knight, the dude has been on fire. You don't get fans shouting, "Yeah," by fluke. He's a prominent character now thanks to his feud with Bray Wyatt and having a segment with The Undertaker, plus he's reliable. I hope now the spooky wookie stuff is done we don't forget about him. The man has so much more to give. Plus, he's damn entertaining. Number 8, Zelina Vega. This is nuts because right now, Zelina Vega is only 32 years old, and yet she made her TNA debut in 2011. That's called being ahead of the game. Rosita, as she was known then, won the TNA Knockouts tag titles pretty quickly too, and started the Mexican America faction alongside Hernandez and Anarquia. So she arrived and did everything. Why not? She was soon picked up by WWE, where she was teamed with Andrade as he plowed forward to become the NXT champion when they got called up to the main roster. Naturally. Sadly, neither of them were ever booked in the same way under Vince McMahon, and yes, there was some controversy with the term independent contractor that led to Vega being released. But talent never sleeps, and before you knew it, she was back. That resulted in a Queen of the Ring victory where Zelina was able to strut around in a crown, whereas in 2022, she became the mouthpiece for Legado del Fantasma on SmackDown. It was a pretty good effort. It also means Vega has proven herself as a valuable part of the roster, and long may that continue. Number 7, Wes Lee. The Rascals were a very good Impact team. WWE saw this too and brought them on board in 2020 as MSK, and almost instantly they were pushed. They won the Dusty Rhodes Classic and the NXT tag titles pretty quickly, plus they got to hang out with Matt Riddle for a while. Now that does sound pointless, but actually it carries a lot of weight. WWE wanted to make sure there was a spotlight on them. It hit a bit of a stumbling block when Nash Carter was released following a controversial online happening with his ex-wife, and everyone then thought this spelled doom for Wes Lee, even more so when he was stripped of the tag team belts and vanished from television. This is the issue of being one part of a pairing. However, rather than fade away, Lee weathered the storm, returned in 2022, and ever since has raised his game no end. As I speak to you, he is still the North American champion, and the quality of his matches, they absolutely rock. It all served to tell the audience he has what it takes as a single star. When that Raw or SmackDown call comes, there's no reason he can't fit in there too. He's got it. So it has been a crazy ride since those TNA days, but when all is said and done, kind of feel like he's gonna be more than okay. Number 6, Bobby Roode. As we learned recently, Bobby Roode's many years of throwing himself onto the ground have caught up with him, and he needs back surgery. So straight away, we send him nothing but the best. Ever since he debuted in TNA in 2004, though, he wasted no time at all. While he started as a pretty cool member of Team Canada, Roode soon went all JBL on us as he played a rich boy heel, before jumping again into Beer Money, one of the most successful teams in TNA history. It all continued when he and James Storm used that to ignite an awesome feud, which culminated when Bobby became the world champion. This was really good TV. It's why Triple H and NXT eventually came calling, and along with his glorious theme song, it all carried on. I mean, he beat Shinsuke Nakamura to win the NXT title, before losing it to Drew McIntyre, who was basically following the same blueprint. And sure, Drew has been pushed harder, but Roode was able to find a place for himself alongside Dolph Ziggler, and I tell you, when he is back with Triple H controlling his fate, I would watch this space. Number 5, Samoa Joe. We mentioned him in the intro, and we must do it here too. Samoa Joe is an all-timer. For he smashed it in TNA, he smashed it in WWE, and if Vince McMahon had understand the man more, I've no doubt he would have become world champion. Remember that awesome match with Brock Lesnar? Joe can hang with anyone. He was also only one of 5 men who won the TNA Grand Slam, as he just picked up titles for fun. And don't forget, when NXT got him, he was offered an amazing deal. Sure, you can perform here, but you can also sell your own merchandise and do other bookings. He was a true independent contractor. That didn't last long, as WWE realized his value, so locked him down full time. And then he just ran through everyone. He defeated Finn Balor to become the NXT champion, and on his first night on Raw, he got to choke out Seth Rollins. Joe throughout was totally viable as a major threat. He would soon return to NXT, where he won the World Championship once more, when Nonsense saw him fired, rehired, and then fired again. That should never have happened, but no matter how you look at it, Samoa has found his way no matter the promotion. He's a forever hero as far as I'm concerned. Never puts a foot wrong. Number 4, Xavier Woods, or Consequences Creed as he was known in TNA. And sure, he didn't have the success there that others had on this list, but he did have a solid tag team with R-Truth and Jay Lethal, and won the tag titles before getting released in 2010. Now that is ridiculous knowing what we know now, because WWE picked him up in 2013, and look what he did. Grabbed the opportunity by the horns, and he never let go. It was an interesting start, as he was re-teamed with Truth and basically treated like a comedy figure, until one fateful night in 2014. For he chatted to fellow friends Kofi Kingston and Big E, and they decided to reverse their fortunes. They should come together as the New Day. And do I need to say anything else? No, I do not. Ever since, they have just been on a tear, winning title after title, and cementing the group as surefire Hall of Famers. Even after almost a decade, they still find new ways to entertain me. They rock. Woods was also able to achieve his dream of becoming the King of the Ring. So yeah, you can't criticize this. The guy totally gets it. Number 3, Mickie James. Some fans may not be aware of this, but while during the second part of her career, Mickie James was very successful in TNA, it's where she kicked it all off too. Debuting in 2002 as Alexis Laurie, she joined Raven's The Gathering group as he went after the then NWA heavyweight title. James Mitchell was also part of this and ejected James from the company after hurling a fireball into her face, but there was a reason for this. Mickie was going to WWE. It was full step ahead from there as she kicked off that feud with Trish Stratus, which was excellent, and she won the Women's World title at WrestleMania 22, which was only her 10th match in the company. It was just the start, as Mickie also retired later at Survivor Series and went on to pick up gold on 6 different occasions. This was also done during a time when the female talent had to fight tooth and nail for proper opportunities, and she's another that will get in the Hall of Fame as soon as she wants it. James is officially a legend. Number 2, CM Punk. Well, we all forget about this, and there's a good reason for it. CM Punk is synonymous with Ring of Honor given his track record there, but before all of that, he did indeed pop up in TNA. This actually ties into what we just talked about because, yep, he was in The Gathering too. Everyone was flocking to Raven. The irony. Punk would team with him as well alongside Julio De Niro as they had a few decent matches before Ring of Honor decided they didn't want to work with TN anymore, so they shut the door. There's not really much else that can be said because we all know the success CM went on to have, but if we are plotting his journey, it does indeed go through TNA, so that counts. Or it does to me, and it's my list. The big question is, of course, what Punk does next, but regardless, it will be a big deal as he's a big deal. I wouldn't dare call it though. Really is impossible to try and figure out. Number 1, AJ Styles. I mean, if you didn't get this before you clicked play on this video, you have never watched AJ Styles. Not only was he the face of TNA and really should have been utilized as such, Styles has just been amazing everywhere. He is one of the best ever. The story gets even better because even AJ assumed he would never get to WWE due to how they saw wrestling, and yet he did arrive and thanks to his skill level, became the world champion. This is just the coolest and reminds you to always bet on yourself. I can't even go through all his TNA accolades as we'd be here all day, but just know he was changing the game and winning as many belts as he possibly could. Without him, I'm not sure Total Nonstop Action hangs around as much as it did, and for fun, just go and pick any match and see what it's like. 99% of the time, you'll get a banger. He will without doubt go into the Hall of Fame eventually, and before then, who knows? Styles is in his mid-40s, but he's still so damn good. He could keep performing for another decade at this rate. It's absolutely fine by me.
These 10 wrestlers all found themselves in a pretty great spotlight and seem poised to find long-lasting success. However, their careers ultimately came crashing down like a Jenga tower, leaving them to gather dust in the Hall of What Ifs. So with that in mind, I'm Gareth from WhatCulture Wrestling, and here are 10 wrestlers that fell off hard. Number 10, Ted DiBiase Jr. Being the child of a beloved Hall of Fame wrestler isn't a guaranteed path to success, but it sure does help. The likes of Randy Orton, Cody Rhodes, Charlotte Flair, and more have carried the legacy of their names well and carved new history into them. Ted DiBiase Jr., however, didn't quite match up. The son of Ted DiBiase got a big build in WWE when he hit the main roster. He entered right into a championship program, winning the tag belt alongside Cody Rhodes. This eventually led to the formation of the Legacy stable, with Rhodes, Orton, and DiBiase teaming together as a collection of multi-generation wrestlers. This stable put Orton on top of the company, and it seemed they were all destined for great things. However, his time with WWE would eventually fall flat. His run with a $1 million championship and an eventual babyface turn failed to get him out of the mid-card. DiBiase then ended up leaving the company in 2013 due to issues with depression and anxiety. Unfortunately, a failed wrestling career is the least of DiBiase's worries right now, as he's currently in danger of ending up in jail due to a welfare fund scandal. Yikes. Number 9, Mark Mero. Taking a single well-delivered powerbomb is, barring some pain upon the bump, not going to damage anybody's career. However, there is one exception where a wrestler's whole reputation was tarnished at the hands of a single powerbomb, and that wrestler was Mark Mero. Mero captured the WWE Intercontinental Championship within a year in the promotion, proving that the company had high hopes for him. Of course, it didn't hurt that he had his real-life wife, the eye-catching Sable, by his side as a valet. But that which brings someone up can often be their downfall too. His kayfabe split from Sable was primed as a chance to turn him into a dastardly villain, with plans for him to feud against the newly crowned WWF champion Stone Cold Steve Austin. However, during his rivalry with Sable, he took a Sable bomb from her. Many deem this as a sign of weakness apparently, including Austin himself, who didn't want his character beaten up by someone publicly powerbombed by a woman. This then led to a drastic decline in his career going forward. One mighty female powerbomb did all that damage. Number 8, Mr. Kennedy. When looking back on the history of WWE, you're gonna see a lot of people who came close to grabbing the brass ring, only for it to slip out of their hands. Mr. Kennedy, aka Ken Anderson, is one such wrestler. Mr. Kennedy came into WWE with a hell of a lot of steam behind him. He had tremendous mic skills, and the ability to put on good in-ring performances to boot. However, it all came tumbling down after he was forced to vacate the Money in the Bank briefcase due to injury. Unfortunately, after dropping it to Edge, it was revealed that his injury was misdiagnosed, and not as severe as first thought, meaning he could have bloody kept it. From there, his career was a stop-start as a broken down Fiat 500. Any momentum he built would end up being squashed by varying issues, the most infamous example of which was when he accidentally injured Randy Orton in 2009, which led to the company firing him. His post-WWE career didn't fare much better, as he broke into TNA with some hype and even captured the World Championship twice, but was soon relegated to the mid-card. But I've got a question for you. Who is your favourite ever Mr. or Mrs. Money in the Bank? Money in the Bank. Let me know in the comment section below. Number 7, Curtis Axel. Again, simply being the progeny of a wrestling icon does not mean you will make it. Curtis Axel is another fine example, as he had in-ring prowess flowing through his veins as the son of Mr. Perfect Kurt Hennig, but that royal blood could only take him so far. The real-life Joe Hennig was repackaged as Curtis Axel in 2013, after a dire run as Michael McGillicuddy. Hennig was never an exceptional star on the mic, but he did have some impressive in-ring skills worth investing in. As such, WWE chose to pair him with someone who could do the talking for him, the iconic Paul Heyman. As a Paul Heyman guy, Axel started to build some momentum. He then captured the Intercontinental Championship and held it for 5 whole months. But eventually his stock plummeted. Despite his talent and the pairing with Heyman, things just weren't working, and he was soon stuck at the bottom of the card. After being dumped by the ECW legend, he then floated around in teams like Ryback, the Social Outcast, and the B-Team, before eventually being released from the company in 2020. Number 6, Bart Gunn. One way this name differs from the other entrants on this list is that Bart Gunn was never meant to be in the prominent position he wound up in, and that's likely why it all came tumbling down so very quickly. Gunn rose to infamy thanks to the much maligned Brawl for All. This competition, for the uninitiated, was a bracketed tournament that paired wrestlers off into real unscripted shoot fights. Gunn was a mid-card wrestler who was seemingly only added to boost the numbers, but he ended up winning the whole damn thing. This came as a big surprise to management, who now had to figure out what to do with a star they'd never intended on having. The powers that be were not confident enough in Gunn to push him into a feud with Steve Austin, as originally intended for the predicted winner Dr. Death Steve Williams. Instead, they put him in an exhibition match at WrestleMania 15 against professional boxer Butterbean, who knocked him out in 35 seconds. After this, Gunn was released from the company and eventually retired from wrestling after a decade or so of working in Japan and making sporadic US appearances. appearances. Number 5. Jack Swagger. There was a time when Jack Swagger showed a lot of promise. His athletic build, tall frame, and all-American gimmick painted the picture of great talent with a strong career ahead of him. But that was a long time ago. Swagger, also known as Jake Hager, began his career in WWE's Wish version of ECW, where he won the ECW Championship. This momentum eventually carried him onto the main roster, where he would show some promise. After unsuccessful attempts to win the US Championship, he was thrust into the main event after winning the Money in the Bank briefcase and cashing it in to gain the World Heavyweight Championship. Sadly, he simply wasn't ready to hang with the big dogs and needed a little more time in the oven before trying to break into the main event. He hadn't built enough momentum and, as such, always felt like a weak champion. This led to the reign falling a bit flat, causing him to be lost in the shuffle, and his WWE career never really found much traction again. After leaving WWE, he played a role in Lucha Underground and even became the promotion's last ever world champion before it was cancelled. However, that momentum did not carry over into his current position in AEW, where he again plays a lackluster background role. Hey, but at least he liked a hat for a while, eh? Number 4. Tomko. This impressive Tomko joined OVW in 2002 and made his WWE TV debut 2 years later as Christian's bodyguard. He eventually went solo and got a monster push with a short undefeated streak. Then he lost his momentum after losing to John Cena and quit the company soon after. So WWE didn't work. Where to next? Tomko moved to Japan and wrestled for New Japan Pro Wrestling, winning the tag belt alongside Matt Bloom / Giant Bernard. But this stay was also short-lived, as he would be released from his contract after 2 years. Okay, so where now? TNA. In TNA, Tomko was again paired with Christian. He was in the main event picture thanks to Christian being world champion and continued to be put in decent spots from there. Then he got released due to alleged contractual issues. Oh, come on, man. This happened again and again as a failed return to WWE, a lackluster TNA return, and legal troubles after being arrested for robbery showed how hard he had fallen. Thankfully, the talented athlete is doing much better now as the owner of multiple businesses. After all his troubles, that sure is nice to hear. Number 3. Ryback. This big guy was once poised as a main event star during a time when WWE was going through a leading man crisis. Now he's an absolute ghost in the wrestling world and our channel's biggest fan. Ryback got his first shot with the company as part of the Nexus, where he mostly faded into the background as Skip Sheffield. But he got some traction when returning from an injury in 2012 with his new character of Ryback. He put on dominant performances, had an impressive physique, and a catchphrase that caught on quickly. He hit a peak during the first year of this run, challenging for the WWE Championship multiple times against CM Punk and John Cena. However, as time went on and his attempts to get the big belt kept failing, he slipped further and further down the card. After a while, he was placed into a makeshift tag team with fellow fallen prodigy Curtis Axel, and this became the beginning of the end. A lackluster Intercontinental title run did nothing to bring him out of the undercard, and he would eventually part ways with the company in 2016. Nowadays, he is completely retired from the industry, focusing instead on making YouTube videos and being an occasional menace on Twitter. Number 2. Austin Aries. Austin Aries was an absolute indie darling and a hardcore fan's dream, but now he's a guy AEW won't even consider signing up. Think about that. Aries rose to prominence thanks to his time in Ring of Honor and eventually TNA, where he impressed as a stellar storyteller and in-ring technician. He was a bona fide star with multiple world title reigns, and after his NXT debut, fans believed things were poised to get even better. Oh, how wrong they were. His time in WWE was full of nothing really, with lackluster painted over all his endeavors. He couldn't even capture the damn Cruiserweight title. Things got even worse from there though, as after his release, he would eventually become a ghost in the industry. Becoming the belt collector on the Indies / Impact wasn't enough to keep him relevant, as his notoriously difficult to work with attitude eventually made all his prospects dry up. This came to a head after the infamous Bound for Glory 2018 no-sell incident, where he got up and walked out directly after the finish. Nowadays, you'll be lucky to see him working for any promotion with even a twinge of clout. Number 1. Alex Riley. Pairing an upstart wrestler with the right mentor can help get them over quickly, and it seemed like WWE struck gold with Alex Riley. Having The Miz mentor him for NXT Season 2 was a genius move, as Riley's jock-like personality blended perfectly with Miz's arrogance. This clever pairing brought Riley into the spotlight as he worked alongside Miz during his WWE Championship run, meaning he had cameras on him during the main event. So what went wrong? Well, quite a few things really. Riley's solo push after splitting with The Miz was quickly halted as he slid down the card. There are claims that this sudden decline resulted from backstage heat with John Cena. Then, in a bizarre and unexpected decision, Riley was suddenly moved to NXT to be a color commentator. He worked hard for an in-ring return, leading him into a feud with Kevin Owens, had him getting eaten alive non-stop. He was soon released and tried to reinvent himself on the indies to no avail, and his most recent notable appearance was in the NWA, where he lost against EC3. Oh dear, it can only get better from here though, right?
Imagine being so damn talented that you're told to go to the ring and make somebody else look good, and even though you tried, instead you're the person that really shined. And sure, there's a paradox here in the sense that if that was your job, then you failed, really, but that's not how wrestling works. In fact, it rarely makes any sense. I'm Simon from WhatCulture, though. Please do subscribe. And this is 10 wrestlers who were supposed to get other wrestlers over, but got over themselves. Number 10, the Hurricane. Lance Storm was a great addition to the WWE roster when he came in after WCW's demise in 2001. He was just so damn solid. He was the type of guy you wanted on your team. He was never going to have a bad match. What he lacked, you could argue, however, was a character, and somebody who had that in spades was Shane Hurricane Helms. WWE teamed these guys up with the intention of ensuring Storm had something of note to do after a loss to Edge, but as the focus was on the superhero aspect, and Helms was so good at it, well, it took over. Fans decided they loved the Hurricane, and he was soon separated from the team and went to tear it up in the Cruiserweight division. Hell, he'd even get a victory over The Rock, and we're still talking about him right now. Number 9, Lita. Do you remember S.A. Rios? If you do, you'll likely recall his bonkers Mexican entrance music, which was pure WWE at the time. He was also accompanied by a manager, though, that went by the name of Lita. This was the idea too. Pairing Rios with an attractive woman would turn him into a bigger star, completely missing that they had one hell of a commodity in Lita. This was happening in 2000 on shows such as Heat and Metal, and as quickly became apparent, the future member of Team Extreme was getting far bigger reactions than her high-flying partner. It didn't take long before she left him behind to join up with the Hardy Boys, and from there she teamed with Matt and Jeff Hardy before becoming a tour de force in her own right. Number 8, the 1-2-3 Kid. Razor Ramon came into the WWF in late 1992 with all the momentum in the world. He had been positioned as a top-tier dude who would often go against the likes of Randy Savage, the Ultimate Warrior, and Mr. Perfect, and even though it's forgotten now, he had a feud against Bret the Hitman Hart for the world title. He was a bit lost following that, but that's when Sean Waltman, aka the 1-2-3 Kid, popped into his life. Everyone thought this was nothing but a guy for Razor to destroy on the 17th of May 1993 Raw, but as soon as he got a surprise win, that was that. Fans loved him. Eventually, Ramon would almost become a mentor to 1-2-3, and behind the scenes, Vince McMahon was properly taken with the guy. This led to him being offered a full-time deal, and there aren't too many wrestlers from this era who can say that enhancement talents are part of the roster in the blink of an eye. He was only meant to throw himself around for Scott Hall, and look at the flipping legacy he's left now, and as for Mr. Waltman, he's about to come back to the ring to sign off for good. Number 7, Crash Holly. You could probably argue this one, but I don't think Crash Holly was paired with Bob Holly to become a star. I think this happened so Bob would have someone to slap around as and when he saw fit. This often happened too, but Crash sold his character so well and soon became tied up in the 24/7 hardcore scene that he basically owned for a while that he was a lower card sensation. Little Holly was without a doubt one of the most popular guys in the company at one point, especially when he would tell fans he weighed a legit 500 pounds. While this was going on too, Bob didn't have much going on, so yeah, whatever Crash's original deal was, it went far further than expected, and look, once again, we're talking about him right now. Number 6, Farouk. When Farouk was first drafted into the WWF, he was meant to be one of the first victims for Ahmed Johnson. For some reason, Vince McMahon also made him a gladiator with a stupid helmet, and it got weirder because Sonny was his manager. It was as if this gimmick was just lying around on the floor and someone threw it at Ron Simmons. It wasn't good enough for the man. He knew this too, and by November, all this dumb garb was gone, and Farouk had become a super serious leader of the Nation of Domination. The feud with Johnson was still on the cards, but throughout all of this, Farouk was such a badass that he got over huge. In fact, Simmons found so much momentum, he had a WWF title shot at the King of the Ring in 1997 against The Undertaker, and that summed it up. The powers that be had realized Ahmed Johnson wasn't going to work out, and it made far more sense to put their eggs in this basket instead. And just look at the career he had. Everybody take a pause and then go damn. Number 5, Daniel Bryan. We all know this one, 18 seconds that changed the world. It wasn't Sheamus's fault this went so badly in 2012 as he was just doing what he was told, but for whatever reason, WWE officials decided that the Irishman versus Daniel Bryan didn't need to be a real match. So Sheamus just bro-kicked his head off and won the World Heavyweight title almost instantly at WrestleMania 28. The idea was that we'd take Sheamus up to the next level, but all it did was start a swell of support for Bryan. It was also a way for fans to stick it to the WWE brass for the mismanagement, and it just turned into a takeover. The Yes Movement became a monster, and 2 years later the fallout of it would see Daniel Bryan winning the main event of WrestleMania after beating Batista and Randy Orton. I'm sure the audience would have been behind him either way, but this one moment just made up the crowd's minds. Daniel Bryan was their guy, and they were gonna shout him all the way to the top. Number 4, The Miz. This one kind of worked both ways, but it was still an eye-opener. When NXT first started, the idea was for a rookie to be mentored by a pro, or in this case, The Miz teaching Daniel Bryan the ways of WWE. Given that Miz was such an asshole, he could berate Daniel Bryan, who could continue to be the lovable underdog. What wasn't in the script was that Miz would be so good in this role that he started to really find himself as a character, and his promos especially just started getting better and better. He also began to feel like an even bigger star, which is why later that year he not only won the Money in the Bank briefcase, but became the WWE champion. He was given somewhat of an opportunity, and my word, he smashed it. It didn't hurt Bryan at all, but it did help Miz, and if you want to describe this as and when he came out of the shadows, that would be more than fair. It's also a reason to go back and watch the first season of NXT 2, even though it is really, really weird. Number 3, Diesel. Shawn Michaels was the guy who spied Kevin Nash on WCW TV and told Vincent Kennedy McMahon, "You gotta hire him." HBK felt like he needed a heater or someone to give him that extra something as he forged out a singles career, and having a huge man in his corner wasn't the worst idea, especially as WWF was the land of the giants. It would allow Michaels to get wins over the bigger dudes, as the soon-to-be Diesel could just punch them in the face, leaving the pieces for Shawn, and as far as he saw it, it could also lead him to the main event picture. It's not exactly what happened. Michaels was on an upward curve anyway, but within 6 months, McMahon had fallen in love with Diesel and decided he needed to be fast rocketed to the moon. It was cemented during the 1994 Royal Rumble, and after that, Nash was seen as more than just a bodyguard. He was going to be a star in his own right. Within that year, he was the WWF champion and the #1 babyface in the company. Sorry, Sean. Number 2, AJ Styles. 2016 was not a good year for Roman Reigns. It was nothing to do with him, but the scripts he was given and some of the circumstances he was put in was just asking the crowd to turn on him, and they did. This we know. Thankfully, we had a great plan to rectify it all, which was to put Roman in a feud with super worker AJ Styles. 5 years ago, AJ's run in the WWE was still brand new, so knowing we were going to get this was exciting, but it also didn't address the issue. Nobody thought Reigns was a bad wrestler. Fans just used him as a scapegoat for all the ills they saw the company falling into over and over again. Given he'd only just debuted too, Styles knew he had to hit this one out the park, and my word, he did it and then some, because that's just what he does. The two had excellent matches which were universally praised, but it also showed management that they had something with AJ in case somehow they didn't know already. Styles soon became a personal favorite of McMahon and won multiple titles along the way. The man can and has done it everywhere. Number 1, The Rock. By early 1998, nobody was chanting "Die, Rocky, die" anymore. The Rock had become a star with huge potential, and his work as a bad guy was slowly winning people over. Even still, when he was placed in a feud with Ken Shamrock, the idea was to help the former UFC man get over, and then we'd return to the Great One in due course. Their matches at the Rumble, Mania, and King of the Ring just proved that a young Dwayne Johnson had something that anybody with any sense would jump on, and the fact he was having such good contests with Shamrock proved he had the chops to work with anybody. Both guys were still super raw at this stage, but you'd never have known it. WWE still wanted to use this as a jumping off platform for Ken to become a major player, but all it did was convince those in charge and the fans that maybe nobody should be sleeping on The Rock for much longer. Shamrock still had a great run, but you can't compare it to what the now Hollywood superstar did, and there's a reason for that, and it kinda starts around here.
Hello my friends, Simon Miller here, and I'm about to be honest with you, and I have no problem doing it. I do not know every single wrestler on the planet, and there is probably some up-and-coming super-duper whooper stars out there I've never heard of, but that's okay, there's always gonna be a line. And if you need more proof of this, just look at All Elite Wrestling. There are a bunch of guys and girls right now who are in the mainstream wrestling chat, but beforehand, we had never heard of. So please do hit that subscribe button, and yes, this is 10 wrestlers AEW plucked from complete obscurity. Number 10, Anna Jay. As of March 2022, when I am saying these words and making this video, Anna Jay hasn't even had 50 professional wrestling matches. Now, I don't care who you are, for that level of experience, she is damn good. At this rate, she's going to be absolute fire over the next few years, and do not forget that character progression we also went through after she got attacked by Abaddon. That gave her a reason to join up with the Dark Order, which made her the Dark Order's first female member. Then she teamed up with Ty Conte, and ever since, those two have just been a delight. Just to underline all this too, Anna is only 23 years old, which should serve as some kind of evidence that sometimes you just need to take a moment before you go crazy. All of this is obscene. Number 9, Powerhouse Hobbs. Amazingly, Powerhouse Hobbs made his debut all the way back in 2009. And ever since then, he's been doing a little bit of wrestling, he's been doing a little bit of odd jobs, but the man has some serious time under his belt. So he did need to start getting some major experience, which he did get when AEW saw him and went, that guy is really big, we should probably hire him. My word, they were right. And whether it was due to his sheer size or word of mouth, the fact they put him in Team Taz was an absolutely inspired decision. Because I remember when they did get together, everyone was like, oh no, Team Taz is not very good. Whereas today, everybody thinks they're the best. His relationship with Ricky Starks is always a joy as well, and I truly think that when it is time to shine a spotlight on him, he could absolutely become the AEW World Champion. I mean, he offers something completely different from the rest of the roster, which is half the battle in this crazy, crazy world. Number 8, Luchasaurus. Let us be honest, without the expanding wrestling scene that started in 2019, there is every chance a man who is a man but also part dinosaur may not be being featured on mainstream wrestling television. So I'm just gonna tell you straight up, thank goodness that changed, because Luchasaurus is my hero. Judas Devlin, as he was known when he was in NXT, did have a little bit of a run there, but I bet even if he had pitched this character to them, they would have gone, we can't put a dinosaur on television. What is wrong with you? Whereas actually, what is wrong with you, person saying no? Everybody wants to see a dinosaur on TV. It meant that when he did debut on the Double or Nothing show, everybody took notice because again, here was a dude running around like he was a T-Rex, but he believed so much and he pulled it off so well, this was always gonna work. It also helped that he was a giant that was just able to fly around the ring, and by the time he teamed up with Jungle Boy, well, that was just like the greatest wrestling relationship ever. 3 years on, he remains a wonderful persona, and the best part about it is, he's one of these things that you can only do in the world of professional wrestling, which is why we have to do it. And if you don't jump on these things too, you lose that special sports entertainment magic. And also, don't forget the horrendous times his species has been through. I really do think he's had enough. Number 7, The Acclaimed. Man, do I love The Acclaimed. Max Caster and Anthony Bowens are so good together, you would have thunk they had been together for years. It's not true. Because it wasn't until they got to AEW that they became a unit, and whether it's their characters, their personalities, the raps, or their in-ring works, everything here just clicks. I mean, I don't think they've ever dropped the ball apart from one sentence during a rap that happened in 2021, but that was taken care of quite quickly, and as soon as we have moved on, they were back to smashing it. The real joy is that they feel like they have been together forever, although once again, I admit it, I hadn't heard of either guy before they arrived in All Elite Wrestling. And that's how you know you've got something, and if they are not the tag team champions in the next 12 to 18 months, I am gonna go on Twitter and I am gonna do a tweet. Number 6, Private Party. From day one, Isaiah Cassidy and Mark Quinn have basically been pitched as the successors to the Young Bucks. They took them to the wire on the independent scene and even beat them once All Elite Wrestling started. And it was one of these situations that if you hadn't heard about them before, well, now they were going to make you notice them. The team has also grown alongside the company and always found a way to be involved. And recently they doubled down on their heel turn because they turned on Matt Hardy, which probably means even by the time you're seeing this, we are going to get Private Party versus the Hardy Boys. Sign me up for that. And I once again will hold my hands up and say that I wasn't that aware of them when they did start out, but given that they've taken the ball and run with it, I am now very excited about their future. Number 5, Daniel Garcia. Seriously, where did AEW find this guy? And why didn't more people know about it? In reality, they did know because he was somewhat of an indie darling, but aside from a brief cameo on WWE TV in 2021, he had never been given this opportunity on a bigger stage. I mean, put over by the likes of Bryan Danielson, CM Punk, and a host of others, he just comes across as so legit. His relationship with 2.0 has been brilliant, and now he's even teamed up with Chris Jericho, so this is another guy you're gonna have to keep your eye on because in a few years, he's probably gonna be in the main event. It's why even though he has lost to Jon Moxley, Eddie Kingston, and the aforementioned American Dragon, everybody still buys his shtick because when he's walking to the ring, he look really, really mad. And never forget that having a good facial expression counts for a lot. He's also a guy that could fit in anywhere because of his fundamentals, so in many ways, he's a little bit of a throwback, which will also serve him well. Number 4, Layla Hirsch. Once again, why did more people not know about Layla Hirsch? And it's because by and large, most of us focus on the American scene, which is perfectly cool, you're allowed to do whatever the hell you want, but I bet if you've been living in Germany or you've been living in Japan, you knew about Miss Hirsch because she was out there absolutely killing it. This kind of experience also makes her come across as way more advanced than the 5 years she's had in the industry, and the way she transitions from like grounded warrior to high-flying eagle is pretty damn good. I mean, I'm pretty sure recently I saw her twist an opponent up like a pretzel before she went and hit a moonsault. Hirsch has a mean streak too, which was highlighted in her feud during Chris Statlander, and when you dive into her backstory, well, there is a character right there. Layla should be put in Team Taz eventually, so I'm just going to stand here and cross everything until it does happen, because as we've already talked about, it has benefited so many, so let's hope it benefits her too. Number 3, Nick Comoroto. My friend Nick Comoroto, who enjoys going on Twitter and calling me a bald guy, and no, I'm not making that up, is a top-tier talent. I mean, just look at the man. Not only is he an absolute mountain, but when the bell goes ding-ding, he can go. Even when he's put against higher-level players, you still look at Nick and go, well, he may actually win, because he looks like a crazed loon. And even though the Nightmare Factory have taken a little bit of a back seat at the moment, when it is time for him to shine, I think he's gonna be like a star. And he has so much potential too, it's mad to think that at one point of time, he was in the NXT system and they let him go. I mean, he ticks all the WWE's boxes, but I tell you this, their loss will absolutely be AEW's gain. So it is once again a watch this space, and I don't think anybody would have pegged this a few years ago. Number 2, Lee Moriarty. This is why I love AEW's existence, because you can go and find any of Lee Moriarty's matches on YouTube and probably walk away going, wow, that guy is really good. And yet for some reason, WWE never seemed that interested. I mean, that's their right too, they're allowed to do this, but he deserves the biggest platform possible to showcase his skills. I mean, this is even before he finds his true feat as he makes his way through All Elite Wrestling, but look at all the people that talk about him all the time. Bryan Danielson, Jon Moxley, CM Punk. They clearly see something in him, and these people know what they're talking about. It's all justified given that he gets rave reviews from every single corner, so mark my words, this guy gonna be huge. Number 1, Wardlow. Not only do I think Wardlow will be one of the biggest baby faces in AEW, but I also think he will be a future AEW World Champion, which is pretty good for someone I hadn't even heard of until a few years ago. Another guy who surely would have been signed by WWE instantly if they had known who he was, Wardlow can do everything. Squash matches, cage matches, main event matches, story matches, blood matches. Anytime he has to do something, he absolutely smashes it. And when he did go babyface recently, and he cut a really long promo, that was good too. I know that loads of people compare him to a modern day Batista, which for me is a massive compliment. And by the time we get out of the other side of his feud with MJF, I think this guy is just gonna be drowning in money, whatever that means. I mean, if you really need a final piece of justification, just watch AEW and listen to the crowd when Wardlow does come out. He is halfway there, which I'm pretty sure is what Bon Jovi was singing about.
Want to know what you can do in a single second? Become a star. Now, when I say this, I don't mean it all happened in literally 1,000 milliseconds, but within this time frame, some magic did reach out and tell you that you better start paying attention to someone on the screen because good things are happening. And yes, as ever, you will tell me, how dare you, Simon, that person is not a star, but come on now, let's go get a real problem. But I am Simon from WhatCulture, please do hit that subscribe button. And this is 10 wrestlers that became a star in 1 second. Number 10, Steve Austin. And no, it's not the moment you're thinking of. We are going back a good year before that when Steve Austin had left WCW and headed to ECW. It was September 1995 and the future Stone Cold was kind of left with nothing to do until Paul Heyman called him. Knowing Austin was injured, he was happy for the man to come in and just go off about how annoyed he was at World Championship Wrestling and say whatever he wanted. Unsurprisingly, Steve signed up for this in a heartbeat, and he did go after everyone: Dusty Rhodes, Eric Bischoff, and even Hulk Hogan. It was the Hulkster that got the biggest reaction when Austin was there dressed up in the red and yellow doing the most ridiculous parody of the man you can imagine. Fans went nuts. If nothing else, it showed a whole new side to him, and from that point on, he had a legion of supporters that knew with the right push, he would go on to great things. And what do you know? They were right. Number 9, Kofi Kingston. It's such a shame this went the way it did because it rocked. Back in 2009 on Raw, Kofi Kingston was finally getting his due and was thrust into a feud with Randy Orton. They were also having a fight in Madison Square Garden, which added the needed fairy dust proceedings. And when Kofi flew off a barricade, smashing Orton through a table, the reaction was wonderful. We were definitely onto something, or we should have been. Because as we have been made very aware today, after screwing up one spot in a later match, Orton got mad in the ring and called him stupid over and over again. This led to the powers that be deciding Kingston wasn't ready for this, and the program was stopped very abruptly, and it would be another decade before we got back to it. Within 4 weeks, the whole thing had been undone, and if you need a reason as to why this was such a disappointment, just go and watch it now. WWE needed new stars, and the fans were ready for one, and yet one mistake throw it off course. This was silly, especially when one move was enough to make Kingston the man. Number 8, Batista. We go back to Raw in November 2004 for this one, where WWE was scrambling. We had pushed Randy Orton way too early into the world title picture, and when that got rejected, some new stories had to be thrown front and center. The answer was to move away from this, and as we were doing so, Triple H found himself teaming with Edge and Gene Snitsky after Randy had gained general manager powers in order to make Hunter's life hell. It got worse when the game found out that his supposed teammates were actually just trying to get closer to his world title, and when he told Batista to deal with these fools, he stormed out of the room. And do you want to know what Batista did after this happened? He sat down, grabbed the big gold belt, and lovingly stared at it. Instantly, this sent sparks through fans' minds about the possibilities, and we all decided, yeah, that would be pretty cool. And what happened at WrestleMania 21? Exactly. Number 7, Wardlow. You have to return to 2020 with this one, even though that doesn't sound right, but this is how long AEW has been teasing a breakup. It happened as MJF tried and failed to get the world title from Jon Moxley after he used 2 paradigm shifts, a move that had been banned before the bell had rung. The key was that during this, Wardlow had also screwed up when he tried to get the Dynamite Diamond ring to his boss, and days later Maxwell made his feelings known. He was mad. Friedman basically screamed in his hired help's face, and just as it seemed like Wardlow was going to eat him alive, he backed down. He didn't want to lose his job. This kick-started the sympathy that was needed to keep Wardlow a bad guy, but also kind of make him a good guy, and ever since we've just wanted to see him smack MJF in the face. It took till 2022 till we got that, and the first seed was planted here. That is some long-term storytelling. Number 6, Wheeler Yuta. This has been anything but rushed, but it may be one tiny moment that put it over the top. When Wheeler Yuta debuted the Best Friends in June 2021, I don't think anybody had him pegged for this. Zoom forward to April 2022 and away we went. As Wheels was trying to prove he was worthy of the Blackpool Combat Club, he engaged in a war with Jon Moxley where he bled. A lot. This didn't seem to make a difference to him though, because towards the end he took his sneaker, which was covered in the red stuff, and kicked Mox right in the skull. You could even say he was booting his flubbing head in. As soon as he did this and stared down the camera lens like a loon, a lot of people decided they liked this man, and ever since it's been an upward rise. Yuta has proven he is an excellent recruit, and I suppose now is best friends with William Regal. There are certainly worse people to be buddies with. Number 5, Eddie Kingston. Everyone that knew of Eddie Kingston knew that Eddie Kingston was awesome. All you had to do was put a mic in his hand and off he went, but he'd never had a chance to do that on a huge stage. So when he did get that opportunity on the July 22nd, 2020 episode of AEW Dynamite, the world imploded. Stepping up to challenge Cody Rhodes as he continued to open the TNT title door, Eddie was able to win everyone over by spouting lines like, "You grew up around legends like Arn Anderson. Want to know what I grew up around? Alcoholics, junkies. I had to survive." I mean, this was pure fire. He also mentioned how Tony Khan had paid him to show up and was also going to pay him to kick Cody's ass, which is just an awesome sentence. And ever since, all of this has just got better and better. Kingston couldn't be more beloved. What a damn hero. Number 4, Rhea Ripley. Rhea Ripley had an awesome arrival in NXT back in 2019. You know it worked because she was mostly a relatively unknown NXT UK champion at the time, and then in weeks was a major player. Almost like she's pretty good at this stuff. This ties into the many issues that plague WWE right now, but as NXT champ Shayna Baszler stood in the ring acting like she was unbeatable, out came Ripley, snatched the mic away, and reminded the Queen of Spades that no matter who else she has beaten, Rhea was not on that list. Shayna sold this great, which was half the battle, and even legged it in order to save face. It absolutely was wrestling done right. This was in August, and by December we were doing the title match, and wouldn't you know it, this was the only NXT that outdrew Dynamite when they went head to head. I think I know why. Number 3, Shinsuke Nakamura. I was there for this, and forget 1 second. Shinsuke Nakamura was a made man as soon as the first beat of his entrance music hit. Everybody thought they were about to see the greatest human ever created. The truth is, he was already a star long before his WWE run, but go and watch TakeOver Dallas for the moment this was cemented in the West. The rabid Texas crowd are just about ready to crown Shinsuke as a future Hall of Famer, and the match he had with Sami Zayn lived up to that and then some. This was also Zayn's NXT send-off and the start of Nakamura's run through the company, and my word, what a terrific, well put together thing this was. We often talk about best ever debuts, and this isn't mentioned enough. It is fantastic. Number 2, James Ellsworth. Want to get scared about time? James Ellsworth nonsense with Braun Strowman happened back in 2016. My word. The real madness with this was that Ellsworth turned a squash match into a multiple year run with WWE. And when does that happen? His line that any man with 2 hands has a fighting chance was enough to pique people's interest, and by the time we all got obsessed with his no chin, forget about it, he was added to the roster. This really was somebody taking their opportunity and ensuring they made the most out of it, and who else gets a job based on 9 words? And sure, that takes longer than 1 second to say, but no one knew who this was before we began. Afterwards, he was everybody's favorite new toy. Number 1, Danhausen. Club me, I love Danhausen. He is just so weird in the way that only a wrestling promotion would allow, and it also makes me happy we have 2 major Western companies. I don't think we get such debuts in a purely WWE world. In January 2022 on Dynamite, however, as Adam Cole was facing off against Orange Cassidy, the Undisputed One decided to grab a chair from under the ring. Why not? When he pulled it out though, who was holding on to the other end of it for absolutely no reason? Danhausen. The fans popped instantly as Danhausen tried to curse Adam before he just walked off, and that killed me again because it was just so silly. This also meant it took all of a flash to not only turn him into a star, but get everybody else interested, because they were like, who is this guy and what on earth did he just do? It has certainly been a roller coaster ever since, as it always should have been. Long live Danhausen.
I do not like the term jobber. Sadly, it has done the round, so we all know what it means. Enhancement talent is better. It takes everybody to make a wrestling show work. Some people feel like getting put in such a position is the end of their career, though. But no, in fact, it can turn out this is for the best. When you smash through the ceiling, you have a lovely story to tell. And who was able to make this leap from zero to hero? Well, I am Simon Miller, and here are the facts. Number 10, EC3. Wind your clocks back to this one. Before Ethan Carter III had chosen such a name, he was in NXT, and he was called Derek Bateman. Actually sounds like somebody from The Simpsons. This wasn't the NXT we know and love today, as it was still finding its feet, but yes, from 2009 to 2013, this is where the future EC3 plied his craft. There wasn't really too much to this Bateman character either, and mostly it felt like he was there to put others over. Like many, he was then let go, but really that was for the best. He soon arrived in TNA, where he took on the character of Dixie Carter's nephew, and yes, that's where the name came from. It was an astute decision, as in June 2015, he won the TNA World title, and he had a 101-day reign. He stayed at the top of the card too, so look at that. EC did prove everybody wrong, if you did indeed doubt him. If you didn't, you totally smashed it. Well done, Gold Star. His second round in WWE seemed like he was going to benefit from this too, but it kinda did in NXT. Then he got called up to the main roster, and it went really badly. That'll be a talking point forever. I don't think he was actually ever really given a proper chance. Number 9, Just Incredible. The peak of ECW is still spoken about today, although the stories of some wrestlers have been lost. You can still see how many of them rose to the top though, because Paul Heyman is doing the same thing right now in WWE. You take an individual, you push their strengths, and you hide their weaknesses. It's how anyone in charge should operate, and man, did Just Incredible benefit from that. If you do go back to 1993 and 1994, you will see him as PJ Walker in the WWF. and he was getting beaten a lot. He must have done a decent job though, as it turned into a full-time contract where he was transformed into the Portuguese man of war, Aldo Montoya. No, don't overthink that one. It was just a crazy idea. Aldo sort of just hung out and played Nintendo for a while before he did arrive in ECW in 1997. No one really knew what to expect, but as well as a good tag team with Lance Storm, in April 2000, Justin had enough momentum and bam, he became the ECW World Champion. He held on to this until the company went down in 2001 too, and really WWE should have used him better when he came back into the fold. Fans were intrigued to see what we could do with this guy. Sadly, before long, he got lost in the shuffle. Number 8, Britt Baker. In 2016, after a brand split, Nia Jax was put on Raw and told she was going to destroy people for a while. A tale as old as time itself. Let's get the monster over by letting them be a monster. It happened to Braun Strowman too, which is when James Ellsworth became a thing, but somebody on the other side was indeed Britt Baker. She got mauled on the 25th of July show. Baker must have done alright because she was in somebody's mind in 2018 with NXT. She was hired to do the same thing for one Shayna Baszler. Outside of all that though, she was also making noise on the indie scene. When of course she was involved in the first All In, she was hired by AEW and bam. A quick switch to being the heel saw her become the women's champion in 2021. Britt was even able to do away with the ghost of Isaac Yankem by proving you could be a wrestling dentist, and during this time, man, she was super over. Sure, it's all gone a bit weird recently, but at the time, what a flipping 180. Number 7, Alexa Bliss. Alexa Bliss herself has talked about this. When Sasha Banks, Charlotte Flair, and Bayley were getting all the praise for changing women's wrestling in WWE, she was a little bit of an outlier, had a cheerleader gimmick, and it didn't feel like something that was going to translate to Raw or SmackDown. In late 2016, Bliss did get the call up from NXT, and doesn't it just go to show? A tweak here, a change there, make sure the machine gets behind you and boom. Before long, she was the SmackDown Women's Champion and the way she presented herself was perfect for the main roster. But Little Miss Bliss persona just worked. Even when she lost that title, she won a bunch more and proved she had legs too. We all remember the Bray Wyatt-inspired gimmick change, and even if it wasn't everybody's cup of tea, go look at the numbers. I do believe she smashed it. If you continue your research, you will see it was a big shift because her NXT record was just lose, lose, lose. Even when she was elevated, you could kind of tell it wasn't going to go her way. The move to the blue brand changed all of that, and Bliss never looked back. She was very important to the product from 2016 through to 2021, and as and when she does come back, I don't doubt this will continue. She went and figured it out. Number 6, Liv Morgan. 2015 was a totally different world for WWE. I mean, that's obvious, you don't need a time machine for that, but back then Eva Marie was being pushed huge in NXT, whereas Liv Morgan didn't even get a name. When they fought, most people referred to her as the local competitor. With a bit of research, it turns out her name was Marley, and of course she was quickly dispatched. Naturally. It soon changed when the Riot Squad was born, and while that was up and down, Liv Morgan established herself as somebody who had potential. The Harley Quinn tie-in helped her, but there was more. And yes, sure, there was some awkward stuff with that Lana and Rusev storyline. The 2022 babyface push didn't work, mostly because it was bungled by the powers that be, but you know the deal. WWE used her unfortunate injury to their advantage, turned Morgan heel, and her 2024 was excellent. Won the Women's World title, had that great relationship with Dominic Mysterio, totally reinvented herself. Liv plays back up to nobody now either, and there's no reason this can't continue. Her act is working and she's damn good at it. Surely there is going to be loads more with this character going forward. I mean, we've only touched the top of the iceberg, so let's keep it going. Number 5, AJ Styles. AJ Styles was ahead of his time. Not just in how he changed what in-ring wrestling could be, but in the early 2000s, he was offered a WWE developmental deal, and he turned it down. Not only would it have uprooted his wife, who was about to become a teacher, but AJ felt like the company wouldn't use him correctly. He had to go out there and make a name for himself. Styles was already affiliated with the WWE because he would appear on Heat and Metal between 2001 and 2002, but of course around that time is when TNA was born. They saw something in this man, and you know the rest. Even though he was one of their most important assets, he still actually wasn't used correctly. And sure, he became the world champion, but I tell you, he should have been the franchise player. It's why he would leave for Japan after getting lowballed on money, and this worked again. Styles somehow got even better, and in 2016, the mega WWE contract arrived, and AJ made a surprise debut in the Royal Rumble. Even then, there was trepidation because Vince McMahon never understood such performers. But the cream always rises to the top. He did such a good job, he won multiple world titles, and if you had followed his entire career, this was incredible. If you do want to pull it back just to the headlines, it meant AJ Styles turned down OVW, and 20 years later was flying higher than most. It's such a cool story, and why he's a generational talent. The man changed the game. Number 4, Bryan Danielson. So I think most people know this story, but it's still quite the tale. For Daniel Bryan, as he was known in WWE, defied all the odds and proved that no matter what Vince McMahon thinks, you can't outdo the fans. Even when he was first hired, not many thought he'd be used correctly because he was quote-unquote too small. Saying that today sounds ridiculous. If you go back to 2000 to 2003, you will see Bryan pop up in many enhancement matches in WWF, and trust me, even the biggest fan of the indie scene didn't go, oh wow, there's a future WrestleMania main eventer. It's just not how WWE did things. The American Dragon also lost the likes of Lance Cage, Sean O'Haire, and even John Cena as he was making his way to superstardom. To be honest, I think Bryan was just happy to be used. Fast forward to 2013, and he was so over it became a war between the audience and management, which ended when he did indeed close the show at Mania 30. I mean, it's just the best story. At first, he was most definitely seen as low on the totem pole by WWE, though. You can't pretend otherwise. They were just totally incorrect, and thank goodness it all worked out. Daniel Bryan or Bryan Danielson inspired a whole generation. Number 3, Jeff Hardy. It is so crazy to try and process this, but Jeff Hardy once faced Scott Hall in an enhancement match. Hall was a big fan of him as well, and that is how long Jeff has been around. Doesn't actually make much sense. I would also include Matt in this list because he would become a TNA champion and an ECW champion, but of course his brother went a step further because despite sneaking into the company as a 16-year-old and losing to everyone, he would indeed become the WWE champ. Wasn't a fluke either. Fans were desperate for it. It was June 1994 when he was beaten by Razor Ramon, which sums it up, and his name was Keith Davis. Amazing. He even lost to King Kong Bundy, which is so insane it will keep you up at night, when somebody must have realized it was time. The Hardys became a thing, and let's face it, they changed the tag team scene forever. By 2008, Jeff's popularity couldn't be ignored, and he did become the WWE champion and a 2-time world heavyweight champion. If it wasn't for his personal issues, I tell you, his adventure could have reached even greater heights. I tell you, my friends, people love this guy. Even with all that, though, he still went higher than most thought, given at one point, people saw him as a beanpole being destroyed by new generation talent. I don't get how he's still going, given the wear and tear on his body, but hey, that is the secret sauce. It's built right into his brain. Number 2, Jon Moxley. Look at these images side by side. It's the same story as before. Nobody thought this red-headed menace was going to become the WWE champion. This is when the soon-to-be Dean Ambrose was trying to make a name for himself as he appeared on WWC shows in 2006 and 2007. He had to grind for a few more years, but in 2011 he did indeed get a developmental deal. Step 1. It was quite the rise as by 2012 he was debuting on WWE TV as 1/3 of The Shield. This wasn't your run-of-the-mill arrival either. Along with Seth Rollins and Roman Reigns, management had decided they were going to push these guys. Within a few months, they were a featured act. After they split in 2014, Ambrose almost became a loose cannon type, and while WWE did indeed make him do jokes, he was able to fight through those too. 2 years later, as The Shield played past the parcel with the WWE title, it was Dean who walked away with the gold. The man had done it. We soon learned he was most definitely somebody who marched to the beat of his own drum, which made him even more interesting, especially because he left WWE by his own accord. This wasn't his type of wrestling, so he walked out the door. Talk about integrity. He also became the AEW World Champion, so go and look at that first picture again. Not sure anybody predicted that, which is the point of this list. Anybody can make it, and good. Screw rhyme and reason. I mean, it would be rubbish, it would the other way around. Number 1, Mick Foley. This one is a bit unfair, but always remember what Vince McMahon said to Jim Ross after JR finally convinced his boss to hire Mick Foley. McMahon, with his usual grace, made it clear he was only doing it to prove the idea would fail. Yeah, good work. Of course, he was totally wrong, and Foley would go on to win the WWF title multiple times, and it was awesome. Talk about a guy that was easy to support. Even as a heel, he just gave everything. We all know his bumps were next level bonkers. Way back in 1986, Foley also got a few bookings as an enhancement talent in the World Wrestling Federation. On Wrestling Challenge, Kamala of all people defeated him in about 39 seconds. The Bulldog and Hercules also took their time whooping his ass, and Mick talked about that. Apparently, Davey Boy Smith kicked the life out of him. Of course, nothing would slow him down, and not only was he a success in WCW, but he did an ECW before getting his WWF shot, and look at the rest. Mankind was the reason The Undertaker was able to get things going again. He needed a viable opponent. Bingo. So if you are just starting on your wrestling journey, go and look what Foley did. If you only replicate half of it, you are going to be on to a winner.
All of the wrestlers that you're about to see on this list eventually morphed into things that had turned their stomachs, make them retch, and make them tut if it was happening to somebody else on the roster. This is not a glimpse into pro wrestling careers that were totally wrecked by poor decision making, but more a warning shot across the bows on what can go wrong if someone turns into something that they once stood against. So with that in mind, I am Gareth, this is WhatCulture Wrestling, and here are 10 wrestlers who became everything they hated. Number 10, Dean Ambrose becomes miserable. Jon Moxley didn't cut his teeth in the wrestling business to hate what he was doing on TV every week, or question how long the creative torture would last. He isn't the first to find out firsthand that Vince McMahon's creative genius wasn't exactly exhaustive, but Mox is one of the highest profile examples from the final stretch of McMahon's WWE run. The then Dean Ambrose suffered through a thoroughly miserable time right before leaving the company for the brave new world over in AEW, since he's openly discussed how depressed he was when appearing in that inoculation skit, or when turning into a cartoonish Batman-style villain that was neither fleshed out nor particularly well thought out. It was not very good. His violent style isn't for everybody, but Mox is the kind of wrestler who wants to have fun on his terms and express himself. WWE's rigid corporate ladder in 2018 to 2019 didn't allow for that, and so Dino darted off to see what was happening elsewhere on the wrestling map. Becoming miserable at wrestling shows was never Moxley's wish, but that misery smacked him in the chest harder than a Gunter chop. Yeah, that's hard. And you know what? I've got a quick question for you. What do you think is the best ever WWE to AEW jump? Was it Moxley all those years ago, or somebody else? You let me know in the comments section down below. Number 9, LA Knight becomes background noise. McMahon didn't see much in LA Knight as an in-ring performer either. In fact, the old WWE boss planned to pluck one of NXT's brightest stars from the developmental brand and recast him as Max Dupree, manager extraordinaire. Nobody was thinking of greats like Bobby Heenan or Paul Heyman whenever Dupree warbled through some dialogue though, let's be honest. Knight also didn't exactly dig being a heel mouthpiece for some going nowhere tag team. Now that's not meant as a dismissal of maximum male models, but come on, WWE's bigwigs never really treated the unit with any respect creatively, did they? And that was never going to change. McMahon stepping away and Triple H seizing control was the best thing that could have happened to LA. The upheaval meant that Knight was restored to his former glory and Trips just let him do his own thing. And he has been thriving ever since dropping the lame Dupree character he couldn't get a feel for and becoming an active wrestler again. Today, LA is one of the company's brightest babyfaces, and his star continues to rise heading into 2025. Yeah. Number 8, The Godfather becomes part of Right to Censor. During an appearance on Steve Austin's Broken Skull Sessions in 2021, The Godfather claimed that he loved everyone in the Right to Censor faction, but it turns out that isn't strictly true. In years since, the artist formerly known as Papa Shango has admitted that he didn't have a lot of time for Stevie Richards behind the curtain. He also thought Right to Censor sucked as an idea. Ouch. Imagine the man's horror then when WWF chiefs told him he'd be adding an extra O to his name and becoming the Good Father. He must have thought someone backstage was trying to pop the locker room by ribbing one of the stalwarts. But no, the writing team really wanted to put Godfather in a stable he viewed as completely crap. Yeah, it must have been some barrel of laughs whenever Censor got together for promo shots or, well, anything at all. The soon-to-be Goodfather went from fun-loving pimp gimmick to white shirt and black tie-wearing goon for Right to Censor. You can see for yourselves just how much of a good time the dude was having in this shot right here. It looks like he'd rather be anywhere else, bless him. Number 7, Shane Douglas becomes second-rate. Being anywhere else sounded pretty darn good to Shane Douglas by early 1996. The guy had been a real revolutionary after tossing down the NWA belt and ushering in the era of peak ECW in the summer of '94. Approximately 18 months later, though, Shane had been rethought as walking cartoon Dean Douglas in the WWF, and he was having the worst time both in front of cameras and backstage in locker rooms. Being brutally honest, the gimmick was a poor fit for him from the off, but he had bigger problems. Shane wasn't making any money, and he didn't get along with some on the roster either, the Clique mainly. In a heartbeat, Douglas went from industry lightning rod to working a crappy gimmick for payoffs poorer than some on the indie circuit, and he just could not take it anymore. Everything came to a head when allegations surfaced that Dean was faking injuries to get out of wrestling. He's vehemently denied that over the years, and just thinks the whole WWF run was a botched experiment. Becoming a second-rate mid-carder who was disliked backstage just did not sound fun to Douglas after gripping industry critics by the balls with the NWA ECW stuff. Number 6, Terry Taylor becomes a walking cartoon. Terry Taylor skirts between being kind and cringing at his old Red Rooster gimmick whenever he's asked. He seems to depend which day of the week it is, and how charitable Terry is feeling when looking back on the golden age of WWF and sports entertainment revolution in the late 1980s and early 90s. One thing is true though, Rooster was so far out of Taylor's comfort zone it wasn't even funny. He'd been a boots and tights, slick wrestler in the mold of Ric Flair before Vince McMahon picked him up and slapped the Rooster gimmick on him. The babyface version he played after splitting from Bobby Heenan in particular was appalling, and went against everything that Taylor stood for inside a wrestling ring. So what, get on with it, right? Well, that's one way to look at things, but Taylor toiled. He never looked comfy with the dyed red spikes or when crowing during his promos. It was too outlandish, and that is saying something for the WWF during that era. And almost tragically, Terry still wore the Flair-style robes he'd adorned in the NWA and Mid-South. You know, when he was a celebrated technician, not wrestling's answer to Foghorn Leghorn. Thanks for stopping by to check out this list today, my friend. If you're enjoying yourself, then hit that subscribe button down below and you will enjoy yourself with more WhatCulture Wrestling videos in your day. Just do it, thank me later. Number 5, Steve Austin becomes a parody of himself. If anyone grabs a minute with Stone Cold, just ask him to name some of his biggest regrets, and he'll surely talk about not calling an ad-lib at WrestleMania X7 by kick, wham, and stunnering Vince McMahon to remain babyface. That's the night that Steve Austin went heel, of course, and he really wishes he had not bothered. He's not the only one. Now sure, it led to some hilarious stuff with cowboy hats, badges, guitars, etc. with Kurt Angle and McMahon, but at what cost? Austin completely lost his edge for a long time, and he became a parody of himself by splicing in comedic cowardice with an off-the-wall approach. It's clear looking back that the promotion wanted to depict Austin as somebody who had lost his damn mind, but they told that story too clumsily for it to be effective in the heat of the moment. Remember, just one tiny tweak can lead to disastrous results for even WWE's best. It really doesn't take much for things to go south, folks. Today, Austin wishes he'd just torn up the script, remained anti-hero face, and then continued giving fans what they wanted to see from him for the rest of 01. If only, eh? Number 4, Shawn Michaels becomes he who can't deliver. Pretty much every Shawn Michaels interview between 2010 to 2018 asked the same damn question. Will you ever wrestle again, Shawn? Journalists wanted some juice from HBK. They wanted to be the first to know if he was lacing up the boots one more time for a surefire hit versus Bryan Danielson or AJ Styles. But Shawn palmed off such queries and repeatedly said he was finished as an active pro wrestler. Money talks though, my friends. Look, here's the truth. Nobody would have complained about Michaels bagging a generous payday to wrestle in Saudi Arabia had the tag match at Crown Jewel 2018 been any good. Well, probably. It wasn't good though, was it? Shawn teamed with Triple H versus Kane and The Undertaker in a terrible bout that everyone involved would end up despising, and fans praying for more HBK were left with a bad taste in their mouths. Who knew that Michaels would become someone who'd happily take a sizable payoff without delivering in ring? That seemed like an impossibility ahead of the Crown Jewel disaster. Sadly, it's just one of many WWE in Saudi moments that have had folks shaking their heads in disbelief. Now, admittedly, those international jaunts can throw up some gems. DX versus Brothers of Destruction sure was not one of them though. Number 3, Undertaker becomes embarrassed to perform. The Last Ride series that hit WWE Network in 2020 was gripping and mortifying all at once. The docu-series wasn't some all-encompassing, glittery celebration of The Undertaker's life and career. No, it was a deep dive into the personal hell one of wrestling's best ever characters experienced when grappling with his own mortality. It was a fun watch. Watching Taker relive matches versus Roman Reigns and Goldberg during select episodes was downright painful. It was an endurance test for any fan, and yet even the most hardcore dead man marks could not look away as their hero admitted he was embarrassed, humbled, and concerned that he'd just tarnished his rich legacy with some serious stinkers. He was someone who'd almost literally lived a gimmick for decades whenever he was in the public eye. Suddenly, WWE peeled back each layer of Undertaker's skin to reveal a broken Mark Calloway underneath. Physically, he was knackered. Mentally, he was ashamed of his performances between the ropes. Calloway has also admitted that he never planned to become somebody who overstayed his welcome. But a mixture of ego, addiction to performing, and desperation from Vince McMahon to squeeze more from his iconic persona almost cost the man his health. It was a scary last few rides there for Mean Mark. Number 2, Chris Jericho becomes what he hated in WCW. Here's a pertinent question for today's product. Where did it all go wrong for Chris Jericho in AEW? He's gone from somebody who stuck a middle finger up at McMahon-led dull as dishwater WWE fare and led the way for All Elite to one of wrestling's most unwanted and outdated acts. It's a remarkable slide for someone who previously had his finger on the pulse of what fans wish to see. Jericho claims his current gimmick is deliberately annoying, but he has X-Pac heat that'd make Sean Waltman from 2001 blush. The reigning ROH champ has become one of those older guys he would have bitched about in WCW towards the end of the 90s. He's taking TV time away from younger talent and winning titles he doesn't need to win, whilst fans look beyond him and enjoy other workers more. Simple as that, really. Jericho from 1999 would have rolled his eyes when looking at show format sheets to see workers exactly like him now get bags of TV time on Nitro. Does Hulk Hogan really need 3 promo segments on the same broadcast? Does Kevin Nash really need another belt? What about everyone else? This just is not working for AEW. It's driving away viewers, not attracting them. Something needs to change. Number 1, John Cena becomes what he stood against. Well, this is pretty awkward. Cast your minds back to episodes of Raw from 2011 and 2012 when John Cena mocked The Rock for leaving WWE and chasing the Hollywood dream. Super Cena claimed to be super against ditching full-time wrestling for film and TV, but then he went and followed in Rocky's footsteps. Imagine that. Now listen, JC is fully entitled to do whatever he wants to do. Nobody's denying that, but his anti-Hollywood speeches have not aged well. Like a pint of milk, those fine speeches. In fact, Cena's I'm WWE for life promos look fairly laughable nowadays. Sure, he's popped back in here or there and has a surely emotional retirement tour planned for 2025, but so has Dwayne Johnson. One might argue that Rock's latest toe-dipping exercise achieved more than Cena's last couple too. The great one was in fine fettle for his final boss run during WrestleMania 40 season, and that definitely did more for WWE than John's sporadic appearances. And that includes putting over Austin Theory at Mania 39. Remember that? Seeing Cena become what he once stood against must make his critics laugh, and it's probably vindicating for Rocky diehards. Have you enjoyed this 10 wrestlers who became everything they hated list? We'll go and have a look at this list looking at wrestlers who hated their big moments too. Trust me, you'll have a great time. Bye bye.